Good afternoon, Tom. You have spoken about how the IUOC is the accumulator of quality and experience. The Free Will Awareness Unit is a portion of that logs on to an avatar to experience a lifetime in this reality. Suppose it wasn't a lifetime of great choices. How many factors are involved in this person's lifetime? For instance, environment and quality and choices. How does that work? Can you explain that and expand on that a little further?
Sure. All of it is pertinent. You know, the the lifetime that they're in could be easy or it could be difficult. They could be born into circumstances that gives them every break with a loving parents and a good standard of life, or they could be born into poverty on the edge of starvation. You know, you have all sorts of extremes and differences in the middle, and the choices that you make. You know, when you judge those choices as high entropy or low entropy, that judgment has to take in all the extenuating circumstances that person has experienced. So if if they're born into poverty and that gives them always the rest of their life they are always penny pinchers. They're always stingy, let's say, and they don't contribute much to charities or give anything away because they were born in poverty, and giving things away just doesn't seem like a good thing to do. Well, that is not going to give them that's not going to give them negatives for having made that choice not to give things to charities, because you can see where that's coming from. It's not coming from a mean space. It's just coming from a circumstantial space. Whereas somebody else is just downright stingy and they say, I don't want to share any of my money with anybody. It's all mine and it's all going to be spent on me and I'm not giving anything away. Well, now that will be a more sizable decrement when it comes down to, how much energy is gained or lost in that choice. So in that sense, then that shows a real low quality of consciousness, a very poor choice. The second one has circumstantial, situational things make that not such a bad choice. Okay, they're still being stingy, but there's a reason. They had to eat dried leaves and dirt, when they were a child, and they just always have that in the back of their mind that one day they may be like that again, and they'd better save every penny for themselves because they or their family could end up in that situation again. So they just don't give any money to charity. The point isn't the action, like giving money to charity. That's not what's important. The important is why you do or don't give money to charity. If you give money to charity and the reason is so you can brag to your friends about how much money you give to charity, well, that's just part of your ego. You don't gain a whole lot of high points for quality of consciousness because you're giving to charity in order to make your image look good. Or you give to charity, but only do that in a big splashy way that everybody can see you and see what you're giving. You see, so the actions aren't what's really important here. What's important was the intent from which those actions come. If it's an intent that is frightened of becoming poor, well, that's one thing. If it's intent that just doesn't want to share any of the excess that they have because they're just greedy, that's different. So yes, this idea about how all the choices you make will, be judged, that's not really the way it happens, but all of these choices that you make will produce a net change in the quality of your consciousness. Your quality of consciousness will go up or go down a little bit based on all those choices. That's true, but it's not just, oh, you made, you did this, therefore decrement 10. It's not that simple. And it's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about why you did it and why you didn't do it is much more important than actually the facts of it.
So these kinds of things that affect the quality, which is what you're bringing back to the IUOC, the experiences you have here, and the choices that you make, can be at what point, for instance, if a child is brought up who regards his father well and listens to what his method of success is, what if the child latches on to that and uses that as a prototype for the rest of his life? Is there a point where the quality of being has to recognize that these choices aren't the best way to go? At what point is he
Yeah.
responsible for the choices?
Well, he's always responsible for his choices, but he's, you might say, more responsible sometimes than others, if you want to put it that way. He's more culpable. His intention is a worse intention. So it depends on age. Let's say your age and you're 6 years old and you're very self-centered. Well, no decrement there. Most 6-year-olds are going to be very self-centered. You know, you're self-centered when you're a child. So you're very self-centered, but there's no problem. Now let's say you're 40 years old and you're very self-centered. Well, that is a big problem because you should have learned in those years from 6 to 40 about caring for others, about cooperation, about being sensitive to other people and their issues and their problems, you know, about being, you know, part of a whole and not just an individual by yourself. So you should have learned all those lessons. So choices made when you're young are, you know, just like in our legal system, you know, when children mess up, they're not given the same kind of sentences that 18-year-olds, and 18-year-olds are really not given the same sentence, or shouldn't be, than as 40-year-olds, because people mature. And as they mature, they make better choices. So you don't fault the choices of the very young very much.
Suppose those choices are kind of, you could say, ingrained in the DNA or very solidly ingrained. At what point is there a responsibility?
Well, the responsibility, you always have a choice. If you have a proclivity, let's say you were born into a very wealthy family, and that wealthy family taught you that it was your right to grab everything you could grab. And that if you run over other people in the process of grabbing it, take advantage of others, that's not a big deal. Because the, you know, of social Darwinism, the, you know, the people who are smart and clever rise to the top, and the people who aren't smart and clever get trampled on. And that's just the way life is. You know, that's reality. And if they have that kind of attitude, well, they're going to get a lot of decrements, because that is just the opposite of what is hoped for in this life of, you know, learning to become love. That's just the opposite. So in that case, if they grew up in a family like that, they would be expected to have those kinds of attitudes, perhaps, and maybe up into their teenage years, maybe even up through their 20s. But one would expect them as adults to be able to see through the shallowness of that, the poverty of that, that they should see through that most all of their parents and their uncles and everybody else who's very wealthy generally are not happy, that their lives, though full of money, are not full of love or full of caring or full of friendship. They have lots and lots of friends, but that's just because those friends are chasing that money, not because they're really friends. So they should be able to see the shallowness of that path and change it for themselves. Now, if they never see the shallowness of that path and they just keep on and also become greedy and also step on other people to get their riches, well, then they haven't learned anything. They came in with that, went out with that, well, they get another lifetime. They just didn't make much progress then. And if they made some particularly bad choices where they hurt a lot of people in the process, then they may have de-evolved some because of that. So, that's the way that is. Yes, you're expected to be able to grow up, see the problem, and deal with the problem.
Well, you
If
have
you,
said that this is a personal journey, this journey of consciousness, and you're responsible for your actions for yourself. So, what is the likelihood of a realization under such extreme conditions that you would ever work your way out of that, and how would one work their way out of it?
well, we'll do the opposite. We'll talk about the poor kid, not the rich kid. You have a poor kid, and that poor kid has always been told that it doesn't really matter what you do anyway, because you're never going to get out. You're never going to get out of the muck that you're in. That life is useless. It makes no difference the choices you make, because you're stuck. You're always going to be on the bottom end of things, and you might as well just live with that. So because of that, then this person decides that, well, there's no problem in robbing or stealing or selling dope to children or whatever, because that's just the way the world is. And if you're gonna get out of it, well, anything goes, because they've had this very harsh upbringing about them being self-reliant and self-centered. Well,
But there's
okay,
so many examples of, uh,
people
say,
outgrowing that.
very much so. I mean,
Sure.
beca-
That's
is
the
it is it
thing.
is it part of? Explain a little bit about how the free will awareness comes about, what qualities it takes from the IUOC, because I know several stories of people doing are very successful now that came from poverty and decided to do good with it. So it's really the being level.
Yeah.
How does that work as far as
Well, it
how that comes from the IUOC to the Free Will Awareness Unit?
well, yes, there's a lot of success stories in that people transcend those difficulties. And there's success stories about people born very wealthy, and they transcend, the difficulties in coming from a very rich environment. Both environments have, you have issues at both extremes. Both extremes can lead you into making poor choices. Say that's true. So you also have a lot of examples where they don't realize they do just make poor choices. They make more poor choices, just like was be expected. Yes, we expect them to grow up and be wealthy and run over other people for more money, and we expect this person to, to turn to robbery or something else to get ahead, because he just figures there isn't any other way, that's open to them. So, yes, there's lots of people that do as expected, don't do very well with that, but there's also those that do. They break the mold that they're in, they see the problem that they're in, and they work themselves out of it. So it's just an opportunity. Now, it depends on what you come in with, what kind of opportunities you have. So if you've been around the reincarnational track a bunch of times, and you're pretty well developed, have a high quality, and you get born into either one of those conditions, on the extremes, you will probably figure it out pretty quickly. By the time you're a middle teenager, you probably are looking at it and you're seeing that the rich world is often superficial, and you're seeing the poor world as punishing, but it's not your only choice. There are other choices. There are ways to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you start doing them, like paying attention in school, getting good grades, things like that. This is my ticket out. If you come in now as a person of low quality, now your probability of seeing that is lower. So you come in and you have low quality. Well, okay, that's how daddy got his wealth. I'll do the same thing. You don't think about the people that get run over, or the people that get cheated or shortchanged, or the lives that might be, scrambled because of your choices. because that's what everybody in your family does, and you're just doing it too. Or the same thing with the poor. You go do what you have to do and you get caught, you end up in jail. And that's just the way things is in your neighborhood. That's what happens to people. It depends on what you come in with, what your challenges are. Sometimes your challenges aren't that great. Sometimes your challenges are easy. Sometimes your challenges are very difficult. You have a very difficult life. You may come in and you have a child and your child dies at 6 years old with leukemia or something like that. Well, that may create such a trauma for you that it affects all the rest of your life. So it's not just rich and poor. There's all kinds of things that can create trauma in people's lives. And if you just happen to be in a situation where that trauma is part of what you experience, then of course the ones that are more highly evolved will do better with that. They'll make better choices. The ones that are less highly evolved or more poorly evolved, they will tend to get caught in those situations. So typically, the way it works is that you get to incarnate into a place that looks like it'll be a good choice for you. It looks like it's something you can handle and it's something you'll learn from and will have a positive outcome. But there's a lot of unknowns. There's lots of unknowns. Those situations could change, the people could change, all sorts of things could happen. So in general, you're matched reasonably well with the experience that you need in a lifetime. But like I say, there are things that change. So in your process of reincarnation, you probably experience both coming in as very rich and coming in as very poor, because those are two of the extremes. And everybody probably is in both of those extremes, experiences both of those extremes. You experience both genders, you experience all the nationalities, all the races, everything gets experienced. And economically poor and economically well off, those get experienced too, because everything comes with its own challenges. So it's just another one of those things you have to get through. And if you make good decisions, you get through them quickly. If you make a lot of poor decisions, well, you just keep at it. You just keep going around. So here's a person, let's say, and they make poor decisions. Well, maybe they just were unlucky and got some really tough situations that they had to deal with. The system will probably go out of their way to give them one of those easy situations where they don't have a lot of trauma to deal with. They'll try to pick a situation where this will just be an easy success. Now, they may not grow up much, but they won't grow down much either. They won't lose much. But they can call that a success. It's just like the parent who puts the basketball rim at only about 6 feet off the ground so their 3-year-old can get the ball high enough to go in the basket. It's like that. The larger consciousness system looks at about where you are, looks at your history, the troubles that you've had, puts you in a situation that it thinks will give you a success, particularly if you've just had a series of failures. It will want to give you some successes. So the system does its best to help people progress as quickly as they can. So yes, sometimes your situation you're in is really tough. Sometimes it's excruciatingly tough. And other times it's just not all that hard. Everything's kind of okay for you and you get along just fine. You almost have to go out of your way to end up making terrible decisions because you're in a situation where everybody around you makes good decisions. So you'll tend to make good decisions too. You'll emulate them and you will grow up. So the system accounts for all of that, and the system doesn't penalize you for making bad decisions. There's no penalty. All right, you robbed banks, you did whatever, but the system doesn't say, okay, penalty. Now we're going to give you one twice as hard next time. The system isn't like that. They don't want to punish you. They want you to succeed. They want you to grow up. They want you to lower your entropy. So if you're having trouble, then they'll give you easier and easier things so you can have a success. And after having 4 or 5 successes, they'll give you something a little harder to challenge you so you can grow up a little faster, a little more. And of course, the system also has to guess. It doesn't know what our free will choices are going to do. It may send you into this family because that's going to be easy. That's just a normal, stable family. And I know the parents and they're real stable. Who knows what chance might happen to that family that blows that all to hell in a handbasket, and it's a terrible place to be. Well, that happens sometimes. It doesn't know the choices that people with free will are going to make. So most of the time, it's helpful, but that's just the way it is. Sometimes you get the bear. Sometimes the bear gets you. It's just the way it works out when you walk in the woods and run into a bear. So it's
Well, this speaks to so many things. It speaks to a benevolent system. It speaks for the system, or the LCS as you call it, or God as some people call it, to helping the individual grow and grow towards lower entropy, or grow towards love, as you say. And there's always a way to do this that is especially helpful to the individual. It speaks to the individual journey that you also talk about on consciousness. This subjective reality that we live in, this individual journey, that we deal with things in a way that brings us towards love, that increases our growth. It helps our growth. Um, it speaks to so much that is hopeful for everyone, and that people who have felt that their lifetimes are a failure need to know this, that they are, as you say, always doing the best that they can do with what they've been given, with the choices, the environment, and the circumstances they're in. So it is encouraging in a way, to know that this progression towards love is eventually going to take hold.
Yes, it will eventually succeed. It's like I say, when people talk about how awful the environment is that we live in, and I say, one day we will live in a very peaceful, loving, caring society of humans where everyone will care about everyone else. And that's hard to believe because we're such a bunch of self-centered hooligans right now that everybody is struggling and fighting with other people. But one day we'll get there for sure, because evolution is relentless. It just keeps evolving. You can backslide, but you'll just keep heading in that direction, and eventually you will succeed. Now, and for the individual, it's not untypical for people to have, 10,000, 15, 20,000 lifetimes. It's not like you just get three chances, or, three strikes and you're out. It's not like that. You just got all the time. You get all the time that you need. You can get there more slowly, or you can get there more quickly. That's up to you, how seriously you take what you're doing. If you
Well,
take it seriously, you'll probably grow up a lot faster. If you don't, then it's just happenstance that, how you know, what things what cards you draw from the deck, when you start. So it takes a lot longer.
I know your theory. A key part of your theory is reincarnation, which is what we're talking about. In other terms, you call it life experience packet. It's a very necessary component of your theory, this continual life experience packets and continual growth. What you are saying speaks to your theories of multiple life experience packets and your theories of how we need to all grow towards love, and that this is our purpose, that we have purpose. Your experiments do illustrate that, or will illustrate that. So can you expand on that?
Sure. I'm sure. From the very, very beginning of the theory, early on in the logical structure of MBT theory, we understand that consciousness has a purpose, and that is to lower its entropy. And that it is evolving toward lowering its entropy. So you have consciousness, and this consciousness thing is evolving. It can evolve by lowering its entropy, creating more information, or by raising its entropy, destroying information that it already has and going toward less and less information. So we understand that idea. Now move forward about 10 or so logical steps, and we have consciousness now, not just a single thing, but a social system. And in that social system, it has the same purpose, and that is to lower entropy of the system of consciousness, the system being consciousness. In a social system, because now there's not only the original piece of consciousness, but there's all sorts of more, let me put it this way, there's a whole lot more individuated units of consciousness, all with free will, and they make a social system. And in social systems, one lowers its entropy through caring, through helping, through how can I help, not what's in it for me. So if you think of a social system with thousands of people interacting, the system where people cooperate can do a whole lot more than the system where people are fighting with each other all the time. I mean, it's just obvious. You don't have to be too brilliant to follow that, but there is a logical derivation that takes you there. So within consciousness, there is this need to lower your entropy. And I rephrase that as there's a need to grow up, to raise the quality of your consciousness. You see, so now you have individual units of consciousness are supposed to raise their quality of consciousness, lower their entropy by the choices that they make. And those choices have to come together to actually change that individual. That free will awareness unit, or IUOC, has to change how it sees the world, how it affects, how it understands itself, how it understands its relation to the world. It actually has to become different than it is to be a more caring, a more loving, a more successful, piece of consciousness. Now, changing yourself turns out to be something that's pretty difficult. Most people, rather than change themselves, just make up a persona that fits what they want to show, what they want to be. So instead of becoming kind, they act kind. Well, there's a real big difference between acting kind and being kind. One of them is an image, and it's got no substance to it. It's all smoke and mirrors. And the other one, when you're being kind, that tells you who you are, the person you are, at the core. So to change yourself means to change yourself at the core. And that's a hard thing to do. So we have a situation where learning is required, where the subject that you're learning is very difficult. And in order for that system to succeed, you can't just give each individual unit of consciousness one shot. Say, oh, we're going to give you one shot. We'll run time through this simulator and you'll make a bunch of choices and that's it. You're done. Well, if that's the case, almost nobody would ever grow up at all. If you only had one chance, then almost everybody would fail. There'd be precious little success, precious little growth, and the system would be at a standstill. It wouldn't be growing at all. The whole purpose of the system is to evolve, and evolution would be stymied. So the obvious solution is that you don't just get one try. You get as many tries as you need until you succeed. So you get an experience packet and you go make choices and you do whatever you do there, success or failure, but then you get to try it again and you get to try it again and again and again. So all of these experience packets are necessary because what we're trying to do is change who we are. And learning cannot be a parallel processed thing. Learning is a serial thing because you can't learn B until you've learned A. So first you have to learn A, which gives you an ability to learn B. And now that you know A and B, you have an ability to learn C. It's like mathematics. You can't just start in kindergarten with calculus. It doesn't work. You got to start with counting and numbers. You don't just start with everybody trying to write Shakespearean, plays. You start with an alphabet. So you have to start wherever you are, and then you have to learn. And learning is successive. It's a serial process. So because of that, and that learning is the name of the game, learning to grow up, lower your entropy through choice, making choices, then it's logically necessary for this system to allow its individuated units of consciousness to have many, with no limit, as many as it takes, opportunities to grow up. That way, the system is constantly getting lower and lower entropy. It's evolving, it's going forward. And so it turns out that this having multiple experience packets, or reincarnation, as other people call it, is not something that I just think is a good idea, or I agree with it because the Buddhists like it. It's not that at all. It's logically necessary for my system to work. You can't carry the logic forward in this learning process if everybody just gets one shot. Then nobody's going to succeed, and the system is going to not evolve. So that's not what happens. If the system's going to configure itself so that it succeeds, it must configure itself to have multiple experience packets, multiple reincarnations. It's necessary. The logic dictates that it do that. No other way to get there except through that action.
So no matter how one perceives how their life is, you are only as good as your next best choice. And that choice has to be one of positive direction, of helping others, reaching out towards, growth and growing towards love. And
That
that's a
is,
that's a wonderful theory to have.
yeah, that's correct. Who you are now is the sum of all the choices you've ever made. Take all the choices you've made, good ones, bad ones, mediocre ones, and you sum them all up. Well, that's who you are. It's the sum of all your choices. And every day, these aren't just the big choices of, in your life. These are all the little tiny choices in your life. Every day you make hundreds of choices. And every one of these choices are important to who you are and whether you evolve or de-evolve.
And like the GPS, it'll recalculate for the next best choice,
Mm-hmm,
recalculating. And
mm-hmm,
that is a growth mechanism. That is, as I understand it, how you see the LCS recording these choices and then determining
mm-hmm.
the quality of the individual and how they've progressed. Very interesting. So make that next best choice.
Yeah, think about it long and hard. That's all of your choices should not be just made without thinking. Most of us go through life like zombies. We don't think about our choices. We just behave out of almost automatic. We live on automatic, and that's unfortunate because you lose a lot of good opportunities that way. There's lots of small choices where you can help, where you can be of service, where you can add your abilities to a problem. And if you choose not to because you don't want to be bothered or because you just don't think about it, that's an opportunity lost.
Well, I'd like to point out, Tom, that your upcoming CUSAC event, that the CUSAC Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness, is coming up September 29th. And at this symposium, there will be a lot of speakers on board with consciousness as fundamental. These are the people who are who are dedicated to their work and who have spent decades gathering evidence that consciousness is fundamental and are on board with your theory. And I would encourage those out there interested in hearing you speak and some of the key speakers at this symposium to sign up and meet us out there at the CUSAC event.
Yes, absolutely. You know, for many, many years, you've had consciousness over here, and science over there, and they never get together. You know, the two will never meet because they seem incompatible with each other, but they're not. Consciousness is fundamental. Science evolves out of consciousness. If you don't have conscious beings, you don't have any science. So science evolves out of consciousness. And this group that's going to meet and come together is going to be talking about this boundary between science and consciousness. You know, how can you derive physics from an understanding of consciousness? You know, yes, that can be done. So the interaction now between these two over here and over here is now sort of like this. You know, they do meet in the middle. There are things that consciousness can say that are about science and help scientific understanding. And there are things that science can say that helps consciousness understand itself. So it's those two now are not, there's not this impenetrable wall between them. My organization, the CUSAC that you mentioned, is kind of dedicated to taking that wall down and looking at the interplay between consciousness and science, and trying to provide a bigger picture for humanity to look at as far as, you know, what's the nature of our reality? What is it to be human? You know, what does that mean? What kind of responsibilities come with being human, if any? And let's look at this big picture, see just how we fit in. And that's combining consciousness and science all in one conversation. So yes, it's an interesting topic whose time has come. There's a lot more talk about that sort of thing now than there was 20, 25 years ago. It wasn't even a subject. Today, it's not only a subject, but a hot one.
It is. And there's a stellar gathering of science and consciousness experts who will be speaking at the symposium. So check the link below and join us if you can. And thank you for this interesting conversation, Tom. It went a little further than I thought it might, but it was fascinating how it all came together. Thank you.
You're welcome. I and MBT Events hope you like this video. If you do, then you should consider being a Patreon member, because Patreon members get early access to our special content. You will also be able to get your questions answered by me in special Q&A sessions, and most importantly, your contribution as a patron member will enable us to produce the content that you're looking for. So thank you.